Welcome in from your SUV, from your tractor or your ute, or maybe you're even riding your electric motorbike. But from wherever you are, you're with Alistair Moorhead and Glenn Judson, and this is the Al and Juddy Show. Well, what we want to do is reach out and provide you some technical information on a range of agricultural topics which may interest you, but to do it in a different way. Casual and comfortable format that allows you to listen where you want and when you want. This is intended for general information, and for more specific advice, contact your local Agricom rep.
Here we are with Lara for marketing.
Hey guys.
Hi Lara.
Hi Lara.
We've got a question here from Dylan. What is the impact if farmers keep pushing calving earlier to try and maximise days of milk/milk production?
Yes, that's quite a... Yeah, Dylan, that's quite an interesting question, but it's also a very difficult one to answer because the question changes dramatically depending on where you are. In a cold environment, that won't make a lot of sense. In a wet environment, that won't make a lot of sense.
But if you're in those environments, right,
it doesn't make a lot of sense.
It doesn't. But the consequence, I guess, and that's what Dylan was trying to get at, the consequence of going earlier in those environments means that you are trying to grow feed or import more feed early.
You're committed to importing feed in a cold environment. You're committed to potentially more intensive grazing phases for a longer period of wet soil.
Yes.
So you've got a genuine risk phase of a wider base of pasture damage leading on your platform and leading into your potentially big spring peak.
And I think the other thing is, depending on where you are to your current pasture supply. So currently, if your pasture supply is early and you're moving calving date earlier to match that, then that's going to be really good. That's going to be fine. But if your pasture production happens later and you continue to move earlier, you're going to have to find either imported feed or stored feed to feed those cows while your pasture isn't growing. So it's about getting out of step with your pasture production.
Correct. And I think that's the art of calving date full stop is one, you're balancing the days in milk discussion at the front end of the days in milk, because of course you can get greater days in milk by milking for longer. If you have a better autumn conditions, you carry more cover in autumn and your cow body conditions okay in autumn, you can have more days in milk. And that has ramifications that are positive because you have less wintering time if you can stay on the platform. But again, none of this works if you don't have a pasture curve that is close to matching your calving date and therefore your cow requirement moving into early and peak lactation. Otherwise, it comes at a massive cost, one in supplement and one in pasture damage. Every day in winter, you've got cows behind wires when your pasture growth isn't meeting their needs is another day where the land is wet and you could damage pasture constantly up until those times. So
I hope we've answered the question, Dylan. I think we have.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, if anyone has any technical, serious or lighthearted or anything in between, please feel free to email your questions to info@agricom.co.nz or hit up our Facebook and Instagram pages, Agricom NZ.
thanks, Lara.
Thanks, Lara. Well, Alistair, you're looking really good. Those drugs must be working. What are we going to talk about today?
Well, Glenn, we're looking at forages to assist with parasite management.
Great.
Glenn.
Very topical.
And today we have a guest, and I'll let you introduce him.
Oh, okay. So we have a guest.
We
That
have
must be
a
the
guest.
extra person in the studio.
yeah.
Excellent. So today we've got Greg Mirams. He's the founder and managing director of a group called Techion. Welcome, Greg.
Thanks, gentlemen.
And tell us a little bit about Techion first, and how we get you in the studio to talk a little bit about parasite management.
Well, we're pretty much an accidental innovation company because we didn't ever set out to do this. So we are kind of unusual because we didn't come out of academia or engineering or IT. We came out of farming, and my background's in farming, and so we've actually become and evolved into a technology company from the field. So we're very much a muddy boots developer. So a little bit unusual in that field.
And how long have you been in that field in terms of, if we're talking about parasites? How long have you been hanging around parasites?
Yeah, quite some time. We've crossed 3 decades now, Juddy. So that's when I started with the original FECPAK back in 1992.
And that's probably a story to start with, because I remember the first time I actually met you was actually at a parasitology conference. And I remember there was a session there in terms of diagnostics for fecal air counts. And I remember there was at the time, and probably still rages today, the debate between whether you can take a composite sample from the paddock, or whether you need individual animals to tell you what's happening in the mob. And I remember sitting back in the back row watching this very young entrepreneur defending the fact that there was this technology that used composite samples, and the industry at the time would given it to you, Greg.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because I just couldn't understand, Juddy, why, as a farmer, if I'm weighing my hoggets, I don't weigh the whole mob, but I don't weigh 10. I weigh, 20%, or I'll run 50 over, and yet they were telling me I just needed to take 10 samples, and the range of results you get back is huge. So I'm going, how does that work? It just never reconciled with me. So, and the other problem was, if you sent those 10 samples away, they'd charge you $100 for just 10. And I had 3 mobs of lambs. Like, am I going to do, that's $300? And I want to do it regularly. It was never going to work. I want data over time. Data over time is where the gold is. And so, and we looked overseas and they were using composite sampling. So we said, well, why don't we integrate composite sampling? It's not against individual sampling, but when you come down on the farm, practicality, we track mobs, we treat mobs, we don't treat individuals.
So that was our first meeting, and I think the second meeting, I think we were both at a field talk, maybe at the St John's Rooms in Cheviot, for those people who know where Cheviot is, and
North Canterbury, in
yes.
South Island. Yeah,
and we were. It was when the first time where we really got that the idea of controlling parasites and nutrition to come together. In what was 2 presentations, but they seem to overlap perfectly. And we've done that a couple of times, haven't we, Greg?
Oh, yeah. Well, look, I mean, animal performance is a complex adaptive system. It requires a mixture of a whole lot of ingredients to get that output. And if you look at, if that's the output I want, what are the major ingredients, the major contributors of that animal performance? And the first one's nutrition, right? That's the fundamentals of life. But the big wrecking ball that comes in that destroys that, you can have the best nutrition in the world, the best genetics in the world. If you've got a big parasite burden, you get smashed. So you can't expect to get high performance if you don't address parasitism in grazing livestock. And that essence runs through today.
Yeah, cool. And so I guess we're going to be talking about parasites. We're going to talk about nutrition, and you've already said previously that you're not actually a parasitologist. I guess in terms of some of the information that we might talk about today, really this is based on some good science, but a lot of experience. Is that how you see some of the discussion we're going to have today?
Yeah, look, I'm not a parasitologist, and I think that was part of when we got onto this for UL, we talked about, I need to put a disclaimer out there. This is we're going to talk about, I guess, my opinion, my interpretation, 30 years in the field. And ironically, I find myself not being a veterinarian or a parasitologist, so I had to create my own academic pathway. So I prefer to say that I'm a physiologist, because no one knows what that is.
You really do look at the shit.
We do look at the shit. We talk about it, but where it's come from, Al, is that it's 30 years of data from all over the world. It's real life experiences. We're able to get all the advantages of users all over the world and the things that have worked for them and modify them and adapt them for markets. And that's where we get 30-50% reduction in chemical use, performance going up, highly sustainable, guys and girls feeling in control of their parasite management. And that's the outcome we're looking for. So yeah, it's a non-conventional route,
yes,
I guess.
But I mean, it's a route that's been formed by the fact that you are a diagnoser and a measurer of the material.
Yeah.
Like materials constantly sent to you from all over the world. You are diagnosing what's in the material and providing feedback to your customer base. Or the technology is giving customers a chance to recognize what's in their animals' feces.
Yeah, for some particular reason, Al, we seem to treat parasite management differently to many other things we do on farm. For example, farmers are looking at, weight gain data, soil testing data, plate curve growth data, like all the time. They absorb data and they make decisions. And the ones that are really, really good at it have quick access to that information, and they make intuitive, and they get better and better at it because the data feeds their thinking. And we know in farming, it's never a constant line. The variables are constantly changing. So why do we think that by putting a chemical intervention in on a calendar is ever going to work?
Absolutely.
It's just never going to work.
It's a recipe for resistance.
Well, that's one of the outcomes. Yep. High investment, and then you get these other associated challenges, Al.
Because I guess as an analogy, right, we don't cut silage on the same day every year without looking at the weather forecast, do we? So we actually get some information in before we actually make some of those decisions.
I think, we've got to remember there's a lot of listeners that will have no relationship to what we're talking about here, to be quite frank. So the technology we need to pull apart a little bit too.
We'll get there. But I think the fundamentals are that in order to manage parasites, we need to be able to measure parasites. Yeah. Just coming back, because we've got a guest in here, and we normally ask guests some series of questions so we get to know them a little better. Greg, what was your first car?
A 1974 Toyota Corona with extra wide rims. I was the coolest kid in town. I wish I had it now. It's probably worth 50 grand now, but none of them exist anymore.
What colour?
Turquoise with a cream vinyl roof and sheepskin seat covers.
Oh, man.
I was top end.
Extremely classy.
Top end. How much sleep do you need? I've got this theory. Around the amount of sleep you need and the kind of character sometimes people turn out to be. So what's your sleep requirement?
Probably less than many. I'm a good sleeper, so I pretty much sleep's comes pretty good for me. So, but I'd probably average 6 to 7 hours a night would be and I have to, because it's, you sort of need a big engine for this stuff, right? Because there's so much going on. It's very dynamic. So yeah, you got to manage yourself as much as anything else.
Cool. And finally, I know you're a bit of a dab hand on the barbecue. What's the one dish that you really like to cook or possibly eat?
Well, probably any dish that someone else makes for me is probably my highest preference. But yeah, I do like my protein, I'd have to say. So
lots of beans?
Yes, mixed with some animal protein.
Right.
Juddy would be my choice.
Cool. All right. Let's move into this area of parasites. Greg, I'm just going to ask you to give your view of the state of the nation in terms of probably New Zealand, but I think you're going to be able to spread this at many other places that have livestock. Where are we currently now? What's the situation in terms of parasites and how we control those?
Yeah, so Juddy, to answer the local question, I'll just take you a little bit broader because some of your listeners might be a little interested. This is not an issue that's unique to New Zealand. It's a global issue, and the issues are the same but different. And what I mean by that is that drug resistance is a huge global problem. The dynamics and the instruments that form our resistance profile is quite unique to New Zealand, which I'll talk about. But the fundamentals of it are a worldwide problem. We're seeing the uncontrolled use of chemicals in our food production. Now, that is a global issue, and the visibility in supply chain is constantly being talked about, and it's been talked about for a while, but the conscious consumer, the visibility of the internet and supply chain integrity comes as producers of protein, high-quality protein, we have to be responsive to that. And, I'd like to chuck a challenge out there because I think one of the greatest enablers of us truly changing the dial on that is our meat processors doing a little more than talking about being a food company in this area. I know they're doing other stuff, but in this area, and actually recognizing the great food story that we can do if we actually address some of these challenges and put them into our food story. So resistance is a challenge. The conscious consumer is a challenge. Greenhouse gas is an interesting one because there's published science now that if you've got untreated parasitism going on, your GHG will go up by 33%.
Yeah, so that's basically all the inefficiencies in the animal. One, they're on your property for much longer because they're physically not growing, to the fact that they're actually not functioning properly in the rumen.
Correct. And not only that, Al, and you've got a dysfunctional biome going on, right? Because parasites are disrupting it. So you have these dual effect. And what saddens me is that I've been in Wellington recently and talking to some people, and I don't think there's any active GHG projects in animal health. And I just go, I don't know why that's happening. So again, if there's anybody listening, that you've got to start shaking the tree, because these are things that we can talk about now, we can address now, we can roll into our greenhouse gas story. And it's not just about planting a tree to offset. This is real stuff. Farmers will make more money and address their GHG if we get onto this.
Yeah, and I guess just as a really good example of something that we're talking about, the difference in terms of both greenhouse gas and efficiency from, for example, being able to wean a lamb off mum straight to the works versus going through a weaning check, having to load that animal maybe with 3 or 4 doses of anthelmintic to get them through to a slaughterable weight. Those two things, they could be exactly the same animal, they're just on a different trajectory. And at the moment, we're probably not taking enough notice of the first one, that we can do this. We can actually get animals to a slaughter weight without any of this if we've got our farm systems right.
Look, you're right, Juddy. And the thing is that I just want to make it really clear. I'm not anti-drench. We need these compounds and we use them. What saddens me in the greenhouse gas story is that we constantly see through our data, because we've got a live database globally, every time farmers are pushing up samples from the FECPAK units, we get in the data. And when you consolidate that, we have huge parasitism outbreaks still. So we're pouring $150 million of drug at this problem in New Zealand, and we still have these massive blowouts. So that means our greenhouse gas is going up, production's going down, because we're missing it, because people can't see it. So if we can make this invisible problem visible, and the guys and girls will change their treatment, it's a win-win-win. You do less work, your animals are better, less greenhouse gas. We just capture that story is what we need to do.
Efficiencies are captured.
So the one I want to look at is, so what's the future, right? And here we've got this problem. At the moment, we're probably relying too much on anthelmintic to get us through. There are these other forages and forage systems that can help us. Paint us a picture of what the future might hold for us in this space.
Well, I think, Juddy, we've got to drop it down into the farm, right? So let's just talk about a farm. So the first thing is you have the drugs that you can use on your farm are what you can use on your farm. And it won't be the same for Al or you or anyone else. It is unique to you. And that's set by your predecessors or your own behaviours over a period of time. So you have a parasite population which is unique to a property. So what drugs work on your farm and which one doesn't is the first building block. What works, what doesn't. And I'm just going, think of it like this. If you sprayed some gorse, a lot of money, got the helicopter in, did all the gear, and then 3 months later it's all budding up again, you're going to be straight on the phone going, "Oi, get in here and what's going on?" And it was either poorly applied or the chemical didn't work, whatever's going on. And yet that same philosophy we should be doing with this. If we are using these drugs, you got to know what works. So doing a drench smart fecal egg count reduction test is number one. The next thing is the risk profile is the importation of someone else's pain, someone else's problem. And if I use this analogy, if I turned up to your place with my rams that you've bought from me, "Oh, here's your rams, Juddy, thanks for that, couple of grand each," and you look at them and go, "Mate, they got foot rot. You're going to let me run those off onto your farm. You're going to tell me to get the hell out of here, right?" And yet, if you bring a mob of lambs in and we did a fecal egg count on them and they're chucking out eggs, they're mine, and you've got no idea if they've got resistance, right? So if you run them out onto your farm and they shit on your paddock, you have just brought my parasites, just like foot rot, straight through the gate. And that's a really interesting point, because we've just published that drench resistance in the New Zealand sheep industry is now cracking $98 million in lost production. It's nearly $100 million we're losing because farmers are using compounds they do not know that don't work. And so you go, because I get asked, well, why is resistance continuing to explode? It's, we've got triple resistance now for triples at 27%. That's like a third of our farms have got triple resistance. And that curve line is just hockey sticking. It's just exploding. And people say, well, why is that? Well, the reason is because if I send my animals over to Al's and he goes, I gave them a triple when they arrived, I quarantined them in. Well, there's a 1 in 3 chance it didn't work.
Yeah.
And when you send yours to Juddy, there's a 1 in 3 chance. So when that becomes 1 in 3, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 chance, like we're spreading resistance because we are not we're not doing the quarantine, right?
And even the measurement. So, I mean, I think that's a really important thing to understand our industry, because the reality is our sheep industry is broken up into a big group of breeders on landscapes that cannot always be finishers. So in the New Zealand context, a lot of sheep get traded. It's not even just the movement of genetics via sires, replacement, young stock and things like that. We are literally trading our lamb flock around the country, and some of it can travel huge kilometres within the country under the rules of how long they can stay on trucks and that. But the reality is they're still travelling long distances from areas with different pastures, different growth curves, all sorts of scenarios. And that's what makes this such a wildfire, is that there's just so much natural movement in our farm system. It's
and you're not just
dramatic.
getting sheep, you're getting whatever they're bringing, right?
Yeah.
So you're right, Al. And we see over time, and we've done 20 years of monitoring resistance profiles, we see spikes post dry years. And the reason is because when things dry out, we shift stock more and we don't quarantine properly, and then we see that subsequent loss.
Making stressful decisions and moving fast and things like that create gaps in that whole process.
So in terms of the future, I'm really keen to just focus in on this. We've got some issues in terms of not knowing which drug that we should be using, whether they're effective. In some cases, we don't know how many worms we've got in some of the animals that we're bringing around. Give us a glimpse into, in the future, what do you see in terms of how can technology help us get over some of these hurdles?
Yeah, so building blocks there are, so know what drugs you've got. Don't import someone else's, have proper quarantine procedures in place. And that's not just a triple, that's actually checking that whatever you treated them or someone else did works. Simple egg count, very simple. No eggs coming in, no risk. There's eggs in that shit, you got a risk.
So going back to some detail, you're talking about numbers of samples. How many samples people, from a system like that, what do you sort of see as capturing a flock of 800 lambs or 1,500 lambs at a time coming into a system? What sort of population dynamic do you need to actually capture that?
So again, it's baseline statistics, Al. So you basically go, look, if you take 30 individuals in a population, that'll give you a mean number. Like if you weigh 30 and then weigh 200, your mean won't change, right? It's exactly the same with this, right?
Yeah.
So when you go and take a composite sample, you pick up 30 samples. And if you really want to be careful, take another 30 samples, do 2 tests through, doesn't take long, 2 tests through, have a look at those results. That's going to give you confidence on whether you're bringing anything in. And it's taken you a very small amount of time. It's 2 tests through your system. You're not doing heaps of them.
It's just another process and a day job. Yeah.
So back to Juddy's question. So those building blocks, what works on farm, don't bring it in. And then you look inside the farm. Okay, so that's more when do I treat and why do I treat? And that's to answer your question, Juddy, about what does the future look like. Because we've got a population of different parasites and we've got a product range of different compounds. So when you get resistance, it is a compound not killing a parasite, a worm. It's not generally one compound kills nothing. It will not kill one particular parasite. And through the year, the worms change like grass growth does and plants grow. It just changes in the same biological system. They fill the space and they have different periods where they like to operate. So, Juddy, the answer is it's at the moment we just pull a shotgun out and go boom and hopefully we nail this problem. And all we're saying is we start pulling a rifle out and we just pick off, we get the right drug because we know which ones on the right parasite. And the reason for that is because A, we know they're there, the new tech part is we're going to be able to not just provide the egg count, but also which species it is.
Yeah.
So you got that. So you're pulling out your rifle and you're just going ping, and you're not using compounds that are ineffective. You're using them in a very targeted approach, and that's the future.
A bit like we do for weeds.
It's exactly the same. Precision weed spraying.
Yeah, but we actually select the herbicide we're going to spray based on the weed spectrum that we're trying to control. And I guess what we haven't had in the past is the ability to speciate on a fecal egg count.
Exactly. And this is where you're seeing, AI in weed spraying now identifying the weed and going, like, just a tiny little zap on that weed, right?
I'm afraid to say I'm going to have to ask a detail here, because how do you do that?
How do we do our part?
Yeah, no, the ID component. Is it a visual ID?
It's a visual, because basically each parasite produces an egg that looks different from other parasites. Some of them are quite close, but at the moment, if you want to speciate your worm burden from a fecal sample, you have to put them in an incubator and do what's called a larval culture, and it takes 2 weeks and costs you $100. We're talking about being able to do that in real time from an image. From a picture of them. So it's just facial recognition for parasite eggs.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, because that's a big deal. And it's quite amazing, actually, considering you've been counting those eggs for a very long time. This next phase is taking...
It's really complex. I'll just state that.
Okay. You got some smart people in your team, obviously.
So let's move on. Okay, so now we've talked a bit about the diagnostics and sort of building a parasite management kind of platform in terms of those different components of that. Can we just turn our focus to a situation where we're getting all that, we're inside our farm. What are the things that we can do inside the farm that might be able to stretch those drenching intervals out, or mean that we're not drenching some individuals? What are the critical bits in terms of the principles of parasitism and the life cycle that we can take advantage of? What are the things that we can do to help ourselves not just rely on chemical?
Yeah, so like anything in life, the more you know, the better you are at addressing it, right? So with parasites, the biology never changes. So they only get wormy. Your sheep and cattle only get wormy when they eat larvae. And the more larvae they eat, the more risk they're at. And
So that's loading.
That's loading, right? Because what happens is as they start to eat pasture and it's got lots of larvae, the immune system starts to respond because there's foreign bodies coming in. Now, that immune response is where your growth rate starts to drop. Now, I haven't even mentioned worms in the gut here. Most damage occurs when they come over the tongue. The damage is done when it comes over the tongue. That's when the switch on starts to happen.
So it's almost like an allergy reaction.
It's completely the same. Yeah. It's that response, right?
And the key piece of work that I thought was the most interesting is in animals where you've got that huge challenge, but with a bit of drug therapy, you can actually turn off their immune system, right? You don't get that reduction in performance. So it's not actually the worms themselves that are having the biggest impact on performance. It's actually the animal's response to those worms which is having the biggest effect.
That must be an interesting feedback loop associated with that. Anyway,
well, here's a little. We'll just dive. We won't dive for long, Juddy, I promise. But in areas of the world where we don't have Western medicine, in other words, in areas of the world, I mean, there's vast, multiple millions of people are infected by internal parasites. In all of those areas in the world, these under lesser developed countries, we do not have any incidents of irritable bowel, Crohn's, any immune-related illnesses. And just think about that for a moment. Yeah. Because what happens is, in our society, our immune systems don't have anything to fight off, so they attack themselves, and that's where people get really sick. So there are people, and there's a lot of really interesting work going on where they are infecting themselves with internal parasites to get the immune system to attack those parasites and not their own body. So this is not a new thing. It's not about animals alone. This is a very known phenomena. So how can we manage that and manipulate that on farm? Well, it's very simple. If our animals are eating low or no or very few numbers of larvae, they will grow better. They will grow way better. You will not need to treat them, and it's entirely sustainable, and you don't care about drench resistance. And not only that, your market loves it because there's very little chemical in it and it's really sustainable. So the whole essence of what we should be doing is not thinking about animals with worms in them and treating them and which drug and all the rest of it. We should actually be going, how do we minimize the larval intakes? Now, I'm not saying zero, because you don't need zero. You just need to, if you've got 5,000 larvae a day coming into an animal, right, it'll just smash their growth rates. You can have 5,000 larvae a day coming in and treat them every 3 weeks, and that will improve their growth rates. But if you have 1,000 larvae a day with no treatments, I'll outperform them.
Yeah, so relativity is quite a big deal. So let me get this right, though. So for many species of parasites, it's the response of the body to the actual intake loading that actually creates the first reaction. That changes, though, doesn't it, though, when you get populated by, for example, gut.
Yeah, it's a continuum. You're right, because then what happens is then you start getting gut lining damages, and the animal can't convert, and you get lining scarring tissue, and it all goes downhill.
This is the issue of identification, and this is the issue of the diversity of parasites in our landscape, because not all of them are gut feeders per se. Is that correct?
Yeah, and look, one of the things I think we've got to watch, because we could rabbit hole all the way down and get very technical here. But you're right; they behave in different ways. They reside in different parts of the animal, so their effect is different. They're not all just worms; they are different. And we're not suggesting farmers need to understand all of those things. It's those base principle issues. So if you look at forages and how they relate to, some forages harbour parasites beautifully. Right, if you take brown top, for example, it mats over, which means the UV light can't burn the larvae off. It traps moisture, which they love, because larvae need moisture. And of course, then the other one is it's nutritionally poor, so the animal's immune system is softened. And we get poor nutrition, parasite burdens blowing out, and it all goes terribly wrong.
Yorkshire fog strikes me as like a hotel for L3 larvae as well, for
totally.
the same reason.
And that's why another part of that is, and this is one of the very obvious things, and farmers listening to this program will know this, that, parasites issues in particularly lambs or calves under irrigation is polar different to just over the fence on dry. And they can be eating rubbish on the dry, and you're going, look at them go. And they put one of your extremely, valuable high performance feed over the fence, and it's under a pivot, and they're going, why isn't that performing? And you guys will cop it, because I'll say, oh, they're just not going anywhere. Well, we go in there and just watch these egg counts blowing out because they've contaminated your fancy feed, and we've taken the edge off its performance because we've parasitized it. And so the trick is, when you put these high quality forages in, don't contaminate them if you can avoid it. Know what your animals are dumping onto your red clovers or your plantains, the stuff you've invested in to do it. So maximize that performance, because too often we see high quality, good quality forages and they're not delivering the performance. And it's not because of the forages, it's because of a parasite issue.
Yeah.
An undetected, undiagnosed parasite issue.
Yeah, we've had quite a decades worth of experience of that. The other one for us, though, at a practical level, is the fact that not all our landscapes can cultivate and spray out every part of a paddock, and therefore I still feel that people underestimate dramatically the grass areas under trees, around rocks and in gullies, which give fibre, in theory, to help adaptation onto the summer crop, a potentially clean crop, but they are great hosting locations with brown tops and Yorkshire fogs and things for.
There was a bit of really good work that actually Greg and I did right back at the start at Marshdale, and we took some animals that were completely clean and we put them on a brassica crop, right, a kale crop for the winter, which was completely clean, and we saw egg counts rise. And it was because of the little bit of grass that was around the outside of it, and they were grazing that hard, and slowly over time didn't get to higher levels, but actually they increased. So you're right; those things can harbour infective larvae at any time. I guess the other thing I wouldn't mind exploring is we're probably coming into an autumn. You'd probably like to get this podcast coming in the autumn. I wonder if we could just go through maybe a sheep, beef, and a dairy system, and just as we're coming, if we're sitting there in the autumn, we know that it might be dry. might not be. What are the things that farmers can think about in each of those systems, Greg, to that might help in terms of getting them in the right headspace to deal with parasites? So if we start with sheep, for example, we'll be coming into mating. We may still have some lambs on board. What are the key things we should be thinking about?
Yeah, it's an absolute critical time. So the timing of the podcast going out is really valuable at that time. So the first part of it is that if you talk about drugs and drug resistance, you only see it when that drug comes under pressure. So if you've got animals grazing on, really good quality clean feed, it doesn't matter if you've got drug resistance because there's the limited parasites there, so you don't even know it's failing. The autumn is when the game changes because what happens is sunshine hours drop, we get moisture, particularly after a hot summer where, remember, larvae need moisture. So if there's very limited moisture, you can have animals grazing, not getting a challenge, grazing on very little but doing quite well. So please don't drench in a drought. Like, that's really bad. It's wasting your money. It's causing resistance. So don't do it but what I'm saying is have numbers to support that. But if there's one opportunity, don't keep drenching in a drought on dry country. But then as you get those autumn dews coming in the mornings and you get fogs and it changes very, very quickly. And I'm sure many listeners will have seen this. The last of the works lambs, the ewe lambs getting crunched, tudus coming into mating, calves, R1 calves post weaning or around weaning, we see all this crunch coming in, right? And so what happens, and that's when the drugs get under pressure, and that's when we see the wheels falling off. So, and it comes back to primary principles, Juddy. So back to your point. So what we want to do is, if we think about what we talked about before, is how can I keep my most vulnerable stock on country that has the lowest amount of larvae, because it doesn't matter. And this is where your autumn forages come in. If you've managed them really well, when it becomes tough, then you get those young stock onto these forages and get them off, lamb paddocks that have been grazed 15 times and, they're smashed, and put the cattle on there, put the ewes on there, but this is why, autumn prepared early winter forages so critical to grow those young stock through and keep things moving.
So what we're talking about there, though, is a couple of different principles, aren't we? Because many of our cropping options, let's just use examples, rape crops, leaf turnips, chicories, part of it is, one, they've got an incredibly positive nutritional plane, which just helps build the energy profile with protein for that immune challenge. But two, the larvae don't function on these types of feeds the same as they do on brown top Yorkshire fog or a wet ryegrass environment, for example. And so, the challenge is part of that management is that they're not in the zone to be eaten at the level they're getting the response.
And you're right. And this is what we're doing is the takeaway message we're trying to know is just shifting the thinking, right? Parasites are 90% on the ground. 5% in the animal. And our whole industry is run on the 5%. And we keep trying to fix the 5% and wonder why we're still failing. Well, the reason is because we don't address the 95%, right? So if we can just shift this thinking and go, if we can understand those larval levels and know who pollutes the farm, where and when do they do it, how do I avoid it, then you just see this production go up, costs go down. In an environment where you're a price-taking farmer and your prices are crap, the only way to improve your performance is to lower your cost line. And if you look at your animal health costs and your work and energy output, that's the opportunity because you can control that. You can't control the price.
Because often what we do is we look at some of those summer crops and say, based on the margin that we're making out of our land,
trading situation,
right, then actually I can't make this work. But if you also said, well, that's also part of your parasite management program, and so that crop is there not only just to feed those animals, but to get them away and start breaking the cycles, then I think from a combating resistance, you could, I don't know what price you put on that, right? So that can be very, very useful.
And I'd raise that one because, we're coming towards the end of this, but I would say that this level of thinking that's been discussed and the measurement and the identification is really important. But this is where farmers have got to have the long game in their minds as well. Because, for example, in the 2022 rolling into the 23 rolling into the 24 season, we've been hit by a decrease in commodity prices in our landscape. We've been hit by weather. We've been hit by the threat of droughts. And there's been lots of reactions, and not everyone's done this. But the decisions you make back in your spending process and cropping systems, for example, alone, as Glenn said, in a reducing commodity market, it's not always attractive to crop. You actually may not get a great return on it. But if you roll into late summer and you roll into late autumn and you are then hit by everything we've just discussed, the consequences of that are much, much greater than not having that safe feed in that landscape at that moment of time. So we're seeing reactions to moments without looking at the calendar year and those big stress points that may come at a later date.
I guess what you're saying here, Al, to put it in perspective, what you're saying is you might not actually make any money off some of these crops in some years, but they might help you to lose a whole lot less.
Yeah, but I'll go a bit further. You are reacting to a moment based on a price drop and thinking about how I can manage my cost structures, because one of the ways to stay profitable in this environment is manage cost and focus on cost. But the reality is if you don't think about the mechanisms we're discussing, which is prediction, measurement, focus on stock movement, but also providing safe landscapes to bring vulnerable stock onto, you're making a decision way back in a spring or a late winter in your yearly planning, and the consequences are happening 10 months later, and they could be disastrous.
Yeah.
And it's not just as simple as selling capital stock in a drought. It's the stock you actually have maybe collapsing in front of your eyes.
Yeah, and the options get short. But I think if we try and peel this back into this higher level, we talked about shifting our mindset to understanding larval intakes, and that's really what you're doing in a lot of how you integrate that autumn feed stuff. The other one is moving from what we generally do as a prophylactic or they call it preventative treatment approach, and going, we need to actually be moving to evidence-based. Like, why? The question, why? Why am I doing this? And do I understand why I'm doing this? If we can start to shift that mindset, it all clips together. Farmers, they talk about, oh, well, look, I'm a stockmanship. Well, where do you get your stockmanship from? You're picking up sensors, and your stockmanship is your eye, your weather forecast, your grass. And what we're doing is we just chuck the egg count in there into your stockmanship decision making, and you're more powerful, right? You'll make way more smarter decisions at the right time, and you'll feel in control of something that most of us still aren't after 30 years of trying to do this. And we've got plenty around the world. And it saddens me slightly that, 70+% of our product goes offshore. New Zealand's our hardest market.
Yeah. One
thing I just want to touch on is this is all great. And everyone goes, oh, I've got to buy a FECPAK to do this. That's quite a big investment, for us, we're going, if we want to truly change a mindset of an industry and a behavior from prophylactic or just calendar to evidence-based, we cannot expect our industry to move if we don't have access to testing as easy as we have access to drugs. And at the moment, they are still poles apart. You can go and buy a drench online, you can buy them in any vet clinic, any retailer, but where can you buy a test easily? Which is why we've rolled out with Farmlands. You can walk into Farmlands now, you can just buy a test for $50 or $40 or something. It's cheap as chips. You can get this data. You do not have to jump into big high tech. You can begin this journey. It's available to you now.
Cool. Well, listen, just as a summary, this has been fascinating, and I think it's been really topical because, as Greg's outlined, this is a real big issue. It's just that it's invisible to a lot of people, and I think we need to change. I'd agree, we need to change the mindset of how we deal with that. So I think from that point, we're not in a great state, and there's some headwinds in terms of our consumers and actually the ability for drugs to work that are coming at us. So we need to change something. I think there's some key principles. We do still need those drugs, but we need to be relying on some of these other factors, our management of them, looking at when we're getting contamination and how we're minimising that, which is a really key thing. I think forage and forage systems are a really underutilised resource here. Being able to get and young animals, particularly into safe pastures, I think it's really critical. And as I think you made the point, Alistair, that starts sometime before that event in terms of the planning for that. I think that's really important. And I guess the other thing is really around that diagnostics. And Greg, you've highlighted that really well. You've actually got to know what's going on to be able to manage it. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And I guess that's the challenge for all those people out there is to have a good think about the parasite management program and get those fundamental building blocks in terms of the control of those.
And I probably would take one other thing away that I probably appreciated hearing and understanding a little bit. It makes total sense to me now. But, we are in a ruminant-based industry. We are seen to have a responsibility that we should be working towards as hard as we can to reduce greenhouse gases from ruminant farming. And the concept that parasite management can have a 30% impact on your outcome in methane production from a ruminant system, to be quite frank, is big.
Yeah, we need to have the conversation.
And the concept of that not being recognised at a very, very high level when we're going for silver bullets, but the silver bullet can be completely broken by not getting this right. And I feel I would like to leave it with that. And thank you so very much for joining us today, because I think that one is a big deal.
Yeah, well, I better go out and do a composite sample. I've got a couple of mobs. I don't know what the worms count's going to be, but Greg, thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you in the future.
All right, pleasure, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Greg.
Cheers.